There are things that I bring with me when I travel, supplements that I bring with me to sort of intervene. I need some intervention because traveling, as much as we like to see it as part of our daily life, it's not a very natural thing. As far as our bodies are concerned, it's stressful and we're not really meant to be traveling across the world or even across the country. So it's pretty unnatural, which means that maybe we have to have some supplemental intervention to accommodate and allow our body to adapt to this unnatural thing. So I have 5 supplements that I bring with me and keep in my backpack or my laptop bag whenever I'm traveling. Let's dive in. First one is simple. It's melatonin, but I only use it if I'm going through a time change. I am not a fan of being dependent on melatonin. Melatonin is still a hormone. The evidence is kind of random and it's hard to really conclude what the solid answer is, but I'm a believer that if you overdo melatonin continuously, you could disrupt the endogenous production of it. So also, why do you want to overuse something if you don't need it? But melatonin is great to use when you're changing time zones for 2 or 3 days just to get your body on a quick rhythm and kind of rebalance that circadian rhythm and those circadian clock genes a little bit more. And a word to the wise, use at least 3 milligrams. If not, try to use 5, maybe even 10. The reason is if you're going to use melatonin, use an effective amount. A low dose melatonin doesn't seem to do the job and you still have the same potential negative effect. You might as well go big and make it actually work. Just don't knock yourself out entirely. Maybe go 10 milligrams is probably plenty. And again, only for like 2 or 3 days. That's all you're gonna really need. Okay, next up, and I keep this with me whether I'm traveling or not, that is magnesium. I usually use dimagnesium malate because it's more sustained release. That's my preferred kind of magnesium. Otherwise, a close second is magnesium glycinate. The reason behind it is simple: stress. Okay, when I'm walking through an airport, going through TSA, going through all that stuff, if I look at my continuous glucose monitor, it will tell me that my glucose is sky high because of stress. You may not realize it, but a lot of times the reason you probably get sick on an airplane isn't because you're in close proximity to people, but it's because your glucose levels are sky high and you're stressed out. That's just me talking, but it makes sense, right? Magnesium binds to GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, and activates it. Okay, GABA triggers sort of a relaxation phase. It quiets the nerve firing, and it can do this in our body, making our body a little bit more relaxed, but it can potentially do it in the brain too, making our brain feel a little bit more relaxed. So a lot of the tools in my toolbox for traveling are stress mitigation. I don't want to be high strung. I want to feel good when I'm traveling, whether it's for work or pleasure. The other thing with magnesium is it is very important for building the enzyme called 25-hydroxylase. 25-hydroxylase converts what is called calcidiol into calcitriol. Okay, that is taking the storage form of vitamin D3 and turning it into the active form of vitamin D3, which is so critical for just so many different functions in our body. When I am traveling, I have a harder time eating foods that are rich in vitamin D. It's just simple course of action. And it's also harder for me to get outside depending on what kind of travel I'm doing. If I'm traveling for work, then there's a good chance I'm flying somewhere, then driving somewhere, then going into a studio, filming, and going back to the airport, and I don't see the light of day. That's not how I like to live my life, but that's one time where I do want to support vitamin D function in my body. You might be wondering, why don't you just bring vitamin D with you? Well, I'll get through the rest of the list, but I don't bring vitamin D because I don't necessarily want to use a synthetic form of vitamin D. I'd rather support vitamin D production in my body with magnesium. Next up is going to be probiotics. I always bring probiotics with me when I'm traveling because, once again, it's an unnatural thing to be traveling and it's going to change our gut microbiome, but also I don't eat the same diversity of foods that I would eat at home. It's just the way life is. I'm sorry I'm not perfect. I know I'm on YouTube, but I'm not that cool. Okay, there was a study that was published in the journal Cell that took a look at mice, okay, and these mice, they had them do sort of a graveyard shift, okay? Like they had them kind of flip their schedule so that they would mimic what an 8-hour jet lag would look like. Okay, so they basically jet lagged the mice artificially. And they found that their gut microbiome was all funky. Like it was so weird and all messed up. Okay, in addition, they found their DNA repair was out of whack. They found their circadian clock genes were out of whack. Just things were wacky, okay? And then they also found that they were more at risk for obesity and diabetes. Okay, well that's interesting. Correlation does not always equal causation, but they took the bacteria from those jet-lagged mice, put them into what are called germ-free mice that had no germ, they were a clean slate, put the bacteria in those mice, and what do you know? They developed the risk of obesity and diabetes and started developing the same issues. But then the study continued, it had a human arm to it. They had people that were traveling from the United States to Israel, clearly very jet lagged. Okay, they put them through a jet lag experience. They took the microbes from them, transferred them into mice, and guess what? The mice still developed the same kind of issues and the potential risks and just being out of whack. So the microbiome seems to play a huge role. If our microbiome shifts just a little bit, it can affect the production of what are called short-chain fatty acids, which can affect how we metabolize glucose. It can potentially affect how we metabolize fatty acids. It can have a whole series of cascading effects. The microbiome is we're just now scratching the surface of it, but that's one thing that seems to get a little whacked out when we travel. At least I know I have gut distress when I travel. The probiotic that I take is called Seed. It's a really cool product, really cool probiotic. They're also the sponsor of today's video, which is awesome. So they are unique because they have a capsule inside of a capsule. So it's a symbiotic technology they have. So basically they have this little capsule and then a bigger capsule, and it kind of has a staged release. So it has a better colonization. So potentially getting the bacteria where we want it to go a little bit better, which is really their claim to fame, and they have a lot of research to back that up. So really cool stuff, and there's a link down below, and if you want to check them out, you can save 15% off your first order of Seed by using that link down below. So use that code, use that link, and save 15% off. Trust me, it's the one that I've been using for quite a while now. Very, very good when you're traveling or when you're just at home, just to kind of keep things potentially consistent. Okay, the next thing that I bring with me is theanine. This is along the same lines as magnesium, okay? Theanine does an interesting thing because theanine is molecularly similar to what's called glutamate. So it binds to glutamate and binds to the glutamate receptor, and blocks glutamate from binding to it. Glutamate is the excitatory kind of neurotransmitter piece of our brain. Okay, we have GABA and glutamate. That's the balance there. Okay, so when we block glutamate by having something bind to that receptor, more GABA becomes potentially available because glutamate's not getting activated, thereby making us potentially more relaxed. There's also some evidence that it helps produce more alpha waves within our brain, which can make us more focused and maybe a little calmer when we're traveling. Again, a lot of the stuff in my toolbox is stress mitigation and trying to combat that. But one of the cool things, if you're going to be sitting down on a train, plane, automobile, submarine, spaceship, whatever, then you really do want to focus on blood flow too. And theanine can help with vasodilation. Okay, it helps with what's called eNOS, which is what forms nitric oxide within the body. So if we can help the synthesis of nitric oxide, we can have more vasodilation, more blood flow getting to our extremities, especially if we're stuck in an airplane seat when you're trying to land in Burbank and they reroute you to Ontario because of the rain, and then you're stuck on the tarmac for 3 hours. Sorry. And lastly, I bring either fish oil, krill oil, or cod liver oil. My first choice is going to be cod liver oil. Cod liver oil, naturally bioavailable in vitamin D3, so I don't need to take a synthetic form, okay, but also contains retinol A, which makes it so that I have that balance of vitamin D and vitamin A, which is very important, and very rich in omega-3s. Omega-3s are like my best friend even when I'm at home too. When I'm at home, I have a lot more omega-3s coming in from my diet. When I'm on the road, I'm trying to combat a lot of the omega-6s that might be coming into my diet from restaurant food, from airplane food, whatever. There's a study that was published in the journal BMC Sports Science, Medicine, and Rehab that was pretty wild. It took a look at subjects that consumed 2,000 milligrams of omega-3s, okay, of fish oils. They found, and this is very abbreviated, they ultimately found that this triggered an increase in their resting energy expenditure. So again, if you're going to be more sedentary, it might not be a bad idea because you can potentially increase your resting energy expenditure over time, not in one sitting, by taking in good amounts of omega-3s. Now, what they did find in this study is that the resting energy expenditure, the basal metabolic rate that increased, was actually compensated for by an increase in appetite. Okay, but if you can control yourself, it means that you may get a positive body composition effect by having the fish oil or omega-3s in place. I'm going to get super nerdy with you for a second, but they also found that it can have a 3x activation of PPAR alpha, okay, which means a higher degree of fat adaptation. So maybe if you're doing low carb or keto or you're fasting, things like that, it can potentially get you more fat adapted faster, which is just kind of a cool side effect. But the bottom line with that is I'm just trying to counteract a lot of the cruddy seed oils and cruddy fats that are coming in through the diet when you're eating at restaurants. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I will see you tomorrow.